Previously in the book of Proverbs, I talked about making wisdom a part of her family. And now I'm going to talk about in chapter 7 a parable of chastity, which is a woman and a man, of what the woman does to the man. Now starting from verse 6 through verse 23. For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones, or naive ones, I discerned among the youths, a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner, and he went the way to her house. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night, and behold, there met him a woman with the attire of a harlot, and subtle of heart. She is loud and stubborn, her feet lives not in her house. Now is she without, now in the streets, and lies in wait at every corner. So she caught him, and kissed him, and with an impudent face, or a brazen face, or a bold face, said to him, I have peace offerings with me. This day have I paid my vows. Therefore came I forth to meet you, diligently to seek your face, and I have found you. I have decked my bed with coverings of tapestry, with carved works, with fine linen of Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until the morning. Let us solace or enjoy ourselves with loves or caresses. For the good man or the husband is not at home. He is gone a long journey. He has taken a bag of money with him, and will come home at the day appointed. With her much fair speech or beautiful speech, she caused him to yield or to surrender. With the flattering of her lips, she forced him. He goes after her immediately, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks. Till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hastens to the snare, and knows not that it is for his life. So Solomon here, to enforce the caution he had given against the sin of whoredom, tells a story of a young man that was ruined to all intents and purposes by the enticements of an adulterous woman. Such a story as this would serve the lewd, profane poets of our age to make a play of, and the harlot with them would be a heroine. Nothing would be so entertaining to the audience, nor give them so much diversion, as her arts of beguiling or deceiving the young gentleman and drawing in the country squire her conquests would be celebrated as the triumphs of wit and love, and the comedy would conclude very pleasantly, and every young man that saw it acted would covet to be so picked up. Thus fools make a mock at sin, but Solomon here relates it, and all wise and good men read it, as a very melancholy story. The impudence of the adulterous woman is very justly looked upon by all that have any sparks of virtue in them, with the highest indignation, and the easiness of the young man with the tenderest compassion, and the story concludes with sad reflections, enough to make all that read and hear it afraid of the snares of fleshly lusts, and careful to keep at the utmost distance from them. It is supposed to be a parable or imagined case, but some doubt it. It could be a real story taken by the author. Which is worse, that nevertheless the warning it gives of the fatal consequences of such wicked courses, it is still too often true, and the agents for hell are still playing the same game, and with similar success. Solomon was a magistrate, and as such inspected the manners of his subjects, looked often through his casement, that he might see with his own eyes, and made remarks upon those who little thought his eye was upon them, that he might know the better how to make the sword he bore a terror to evildoers. But here he writes as a minister, a prophet, who is by office a watchman, to give warning of the approach of the enemies, and especially where they lie in ambush, that we may not be ignorant of Satan's devices, but may know where to double our guard. This Solomon does here, where we may observe the account. He gives of the person tempted, and how he laid himself open to the temptation. He was a young man. Fleshly lusts are called youthful lusts, not to extenuate them as tricks of youth, and therefore excusable, but rather to aggravate them, as robbing God of the first and best of our time, and by debauching the mind when it is tender, laying a foundation for a bad life ever after. That's why God says to train your child up in righteousness, because when he is old, he won't depart from it. And that's why Satan strikes at the youth. So this lays a foundation for a bad life ever after, and to intimate that young people ought, in a special manner, to fortify their resolutions against this sin. Now, he was a young man void of understanding, that went abroad into the world, not principled as he ought to have been with wisdom and the fear of God, and so ventured to sea without ballast, without pilot, cord, or compass, he knew not how to depart from evil, which is the best understanding. Those become an easy prey to Satan who, when they have arrived to the stature of men, have scarcely the understanding of children. He kept bad company. That was another mistake of his. He was a young man among the youths, a silly young man among the simple ones. This was also Rehoboam's mistake. He took counsel of the young men instead of the old men. So, if, being conscious of his own weakness, he had associated with those that were older and wiser than himself, there would have been hopes of him. Christ, at 12 years old, conversed with the doctors to set young people an example of this. But if those that are simple choose such for their companions as are like themselves, simple they will still be, or naive will they still be, and hardened in their simplicity. That's why you see this cliche picture of teenagers hanging out with teenagers, children hanging out with children. To be realistic, it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be children and adults, because that way it's an advantage to the children to be taught something good. Now, of course, it could bring bad apple too. The child can learn something evil from that older person, but nevertheless, it's supposed to be that way. Now, another mistake he made is that he was sauntering and had nothing to do, but passed through the street as one that knew not how to dispose of himself. One of the sins of filthy Sodom was abundance of idleness. He went in a starched, stately manner, so it is said the word signifies. He appeared to be a nice form of fop, the top of whose accomplishments was to dress well and walk with a good air-fit game for that bird of prey to fly at. Keep in mind that if this is a parable, an imagined case, then I'm guessing that the author purposely made this character very, very foolish in every sort of way so that we may be in the reverse, the opposite. Now, another mistake he made a lot of mistakes. So this mistake that he made is that he was a night walker that hated and scorned the business that is to be done by daylight, from which the evening calls men in their repose and having fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. He begins to move in the twilight in the evening, and he chooses the black and dark night as fittest for his purpose, not the moonlight nights when he might be discovered. Now, another foolish thing he did is that he steered his course towards the house of one that he thought would entertain him, and that he might be happy with. He went near her corner, the way of her house, contrary to Solomon's advice. Come not near the door of her house. Perhaps he did not know it was the way to an infamous house, but however, it was a way that he had no business in. And when we have nothing to do, the devil will quickly find us something to do. We must take heed, not only of idle days, but of idle evenings, lest they prove inlets to temptation. So in case if you're ever idling and have nothing to do, be careful, because Satan is smart to choose that exact moment to tempt you. Now, of the person tempting, not a common prostitute, for she was a married wife, and for aught that appears lived in reputation among her neighbors, not suspected of any such wickedness, and yet in the twilight of the evening, when her husband was abroad, abominably impudent, she is here described, number one, by her dress. She had the attire of a harlot, gaudy and flaunting, to set her off as a beauty. Perhaps she was painted as Jezebel, and went with her neck and breasts bare, loose, and in dishabille. The purity of the heart will show itself in the modesty of the dress, which becomes women professing godliness. Number two, by her craft and management, she is subtle of heart, mistress of all the arts of wheedling, and knowing how, by all her caresses, to serve her own base purposes. Number three, by her temper and carriage, she is loud and stubborn, talkative and self-willed, noisy and troublesome, willful and headstrong, all tongue, and will have her saying, right or wrong, impatient of check and control, and cannot bear to be counseled, much less reproved or corrected by husband or parents, ministers or friends. She is a daughter of Belial that will endure no yoke. Number four, by her place, not her own house, she hates the confinement and employment of that her feet abide not there any longer than necessarily must. She is all for gadding abroad, changing place and company. Now is she without in the country under pretense of taking the air, now in the streets of the city under pretense of seeing how the market goes. She is here and there and everywhere, but where she should be. She lies in wait at every corner to pick up such as she can make a prey of. Virtue is a penance to those whom home is a prison. So of the temptation itself and the management of it, she met the young spark. Perhaps she knew him, however, she knew by his fashions that he was such a one as she wished for. So she caught him around the neck and kissed him, contrary to all the rules of modesty. and waited not for his compliments or courtship, but with an impudent face invited him not only to her house, but to her bed. She courted him to sup with her. I have peace offerings with me. Hereby she gives him to understand, number 1, her prosperity, that she was compassed or surrounded around with so many blessings that she had occasion to offer peace offerings, in token or in sign of joy and thankfulness. She was beforehand in the world, so that he needed not fear having his pocket picked. Number 2, her profession of piety. She had been today at the temple, and was as well respected there as any that worshipped in the courts of the Lord. She had paid her vows, and as she thought, made all even with God Almighty, and therefore might venture upon a new score of sins. And that's exactly how people are today. God has forgiven me. Let me go sin some more. God will forgive me. Let me go sin some more. God will forgive me. This is exactly what the harlot did. She thought that this was routine, that God was a force that you could pay, and that was it. God is not a force that you could do that stuff. He's a person. He's not stupid. So note, the external performances of religion, if they do not harden men against sin, harden them in it, and embolden carnal hearts to venture upon it, in hopes that when they come to count and discount with God, he will find as much in debt to them for their peace offerings, and their vows as they to him for their sins. But it is sad that a show of piety should become the shelter of iniquity, which really doubles the shame of it, and makes it more exceedingly sinful, and that men should baffle their conscience with those very things that should startle them. The Pharisees made long prayers that they might the more plausibly carry on their covetous and mischievous provisions. The greatest part of the flesh of the peace offerings was by the law returned back to the offerers, to feast upon with their friends, which, if they were peace offerings of thanksgiving, was to be all eaten the same day, and none of it left until the morning. The law of charity and generosity is abused to be a color for gluttony and excess. Come, says she, come home with me, for I have good cheer enough, and only want good company to help me off with it. It was a pity that the peace offerings should thus become, in a bad sense, sin offerings, and that what was designed for the honor of God should become the food and fuel of a base lust. But this is not all. Number 4, to strengthen the temptation. She pretends to have a very great affection for him above any man. Therefore, because I have a good supper upon the table, I came forth to meet you, for no friend in the world shall be so welcome to it as you shall. You are he whom I came on purpose to seek diligently, came myself, and would not send a servant. Surely he cannot deny her his company when she put such a value upon it, and would take all this pains to obtain the favor of it. Sinners take pains to do mischief, and are as the roaring lion himself. They go around seeking to devour, and yet pretend they are seeking to oblige. She would have it thought that the providence itself countenanced her choice of him for her companion, for how quickly had she found him whom she sought. So she courted him to lie with her. They will sit down to eat and drink, and then rise up to play the wanton, and there is a bed ready for them, where he shall find that which will be in all respects agreeable to him. To please his eye, it is decked with coverings of tapestry and carved works, exquisitely fine, he never saw the like. To please his touch, the sheets are not of homespun cloth. They are far-fetched and dear, bought they are fine linen of Egypt. To gratify his smell, it is perfumed with the sweetest scents. Come, therefore, and let us take our fill of love. Of love, does she say? Of lust, she means, brutish lust. But it is a pity that the name of love should be thus abused. Because that's why homosexuality today are saying that that's love. That's not love. That's lust. There's a big difference. True love is from heaven. This kind of love is from hell. How can those pretend to enjoy themselves and love one another who are really ruining themselves and one another? So she anticipated the objection which he might make of the danger of it. Is she not another man's wife? And what if her husband should catch them in adultery in the very act? He will make them pay dearly for their sport, and where will the enjoyments of their love be then? Never fear, says she, the good man or the husband is not at home. She does not call him her husband, for she forsakes the guide of her youth, and forgets the covenant of her God, but the good man of the house she calls, whom I am weary of. Thus Potiphar's wife, when she spoke of her husband, would not call himself, but he. It is therefore with good reason taken notice of, to Sarah's praise, that she spoke respectfully of her husband, calling him Lord. She pleases herself with this, that he is not at home, and therefore she is melancholy if she have not some company. And therefore whatever company she has, she may be free with them. For she is from under his eye, and he shall never know. But will he not return quickly? No, he has gone a long journey, and cannot return. On a sudden, he appointed the day of his return, and he never comes home sooner than he says he will. He has taken a bag of money with him, either number one to trade with, to buy goods with, and he will not return till he has laid it all out. It is a pity that an honest, industrious man should be thus abused, and advantage taken of his absence, when it is upon business, for the good of his family. Or number two, to spend and revel with. Whether justly or not, she insinuates that he was a bad husband, so she would represent him because she was resolved to be a bad wife, and must have that for an excuse. It is often groundlessly suggested, but it is never a sufficient excuse. He follows his pleasures and wastes his estate abroad, says she, and why should not I do the same at home? Now, of the success of the temptation, promising the young man everything that was pleasant, and impunity in the enjoyment, she gained her point. It should seem the youth, though very simple or naive, had no ill design, else a word, a beck, a wink would have served, and there would have been no need of all this harangue. But though he did not intend any such thing, had something in his conscience that opposed it, probably, yet with her much fair speech, she caused him to yield. His corruptions at length triumphed over his convictions, and his resolutions were not strong enough to hold out against such artful attacks as these. But with the flattery of her lips she forced him. He could not stop his ear against such a charmer, but surrendered himself her captive. Wisdom's maidens, who plead her cause, and have reason on their side, and true and divine pleasures to invite men to, have a deaf ear turned to them, and with all their rhetoric cannot compel men to come in. But such is the dominion of sin in the hearts of men, that its allurements soon prevail by falsehood and flattery. Now with what pity does Solomon here look upon this foolish young man, when he sees him follow the adulterous woman. Number one, he gives up, for gone, alas, he is undone. He goes to the slaughter, for houses of uncleanness are slaughterhouses to precious souls. A dart will presently strike through his liver. Going without his breastplate, he will receive his death's wound. It is his life, his precious life, that is thus irrecoverably thrown away. He is perfectly lost to all good, his conscience is debauched, a door is opened to all other vices, and this will certainly end in his endless damnation. Number two, that which makes his case the more piteous is that he is not himself aware of his misery and danger. He goes blindfold. He goes laughing to his ruin. The ox thinks he is led to the pasture when he is led to the slaughter. The fool, that is the drunkard, for of all sinners, drunkards are the greatest fools, is led to the correction of the stocks, and is not sensible of the shame of it, but goes to it as if he were going to a play. The bird that hastes to the snare looks only at the bait, and promises herself a good bit from that, and considers not that it is for her life. Thus this unthinking, unwary young man dreams of nothing but the pleasures he shall have in the embraces of the harlot, while really he is running and headlong upon his ruin. Though Solomon does not here tell us that he put the law in execution against the base harlot, yet we have no reason to think but that he did. He was himself so affected with the mischief she did, and had such an indignation at it. Now to finish this off with verse 24 through verse 27. Listen to me now therefore, O you children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart decline to her ways. Go not astray in her paths. For she has cast down many wounded, yes, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. Now we have here the application of the foregoing story. Listen to me therefore, and not to such seducers. Give ear to a father, and not to an enemy. Number one, take good counsel when it is given to you. Let not your heart decline to her ways. Never leave the paths of virtue, though firm and narrow, solitary and uphill, for the way of the adulteress, though green and broad and crowded with company. Do not only keep your feet from those ways, but let not so much as your heart incline to them. Never harbor a disposition in this way, nor think otherwise than with abhorrence or hatred of such wicked practices as these. Let reason and conscience and the fear of God ruling in the heart check the inclinations of the sensual appetite. If you go in her paths, in any of the paths that lead to this sin, you go astray. You are out of the right way, the safe way. Therefore take heed. Go not astray, lest you wander endlessly. Number two, take fair warning when it is given to you. Look back and see what mischief this sin has done. The adulteress has been the ruin not of here and there, not of one, not just only one, but she has cast down many wounded. Thousands have been undone now and forever by this sin, and those not only the weak and simple youths, such as he was of whom he had now spoken, but many strong men have been slain by her. Herein perhaps he has an eye especially to Samson, who was slain by his sin, and perhaps to David too, who by this sin entailed a sword upon his house, though so far the Lord took it away that he himself should not die. These were men not only of great bodily strength, but of eminent wisdom and courage, and yet their fleshly lust prevailed over them. Howl, fir trees, if the cedars be shaken. Let him that thinks he stands take heed, be careful lest he fall. Look forward with an eye of faith, and see what will be in the end of it, life. Her house, though richly decked and furnished, and called a house of pleasure, is the way to hell, and her chambers are the staircase that goes down to the chambers of death and everlasting darkness. The cup of fornication must shortly be exchanged for the cup of trembling, and the flames of lust, if not quenched by repentance and mortification, or changing, will burn to the lowest hell. Therefore stand in awe, and sin not. And that is the story of the whorish woman who tempted this man. And again, if this is a parable, I'm guessing that the author purposely made this man as foolish as he can be in ways of life, in ways of steps, in ways of thinking, in ways of dressing, so that we as victims can relate to this man, to not be like him. About this lust, pornography, whatever it may be, take this into account of what the end was, what the temptations were, and what your faults can be. Step away from that, change your ways, be careful. Always think about this if you need to. But that was that, and now I'm going to be moving on, God willing, to wisdom described. What is wisdom, or at least I should say, describing wisdom, wisdom being portrayed.